Uh, Dear students, welcome. Welcome once again to our session, discussion on research methods and research methodology. And today we would like to discuss about our lecture 4, which will focus on methodology. And specifically, the methodology section we want to explain here today is about the sampling section. Of course, after reviewing literature, as we had discussed in the previous session in lecture 3, where we talked about literature review as well as referencing. So after you review the literature at this particular moment, the researcher is in a better position to decide on the research methodology and apply accordingly. So meaning that after the literature review, the next step or the next activity that the researcher needs to focus on is how to design his or her methodology and apply that particular methodology in his or her research work. What then is a research? What then is a methodology? That's a very good question, which actually we need to actually look into. Methodology, we describe it as a step-by-step process or methods of how one intends to achieve the objectives of the study or the research. So this is the processes which you are going to actually show or explain how you are going to achieve your objectives. The objectives which you have stated in your introductory section or in your introductory chapter. How are you going to achieve those objectives of your study? Whether it is the general objective or the specific objectives, how are you going to achieve them? So you're going to show us step by step how you're going to do that. So with methodology, the word methodology refers to the overall approaches and perspectives of the research as a whole, and is concerned with the following main issues. Number one is why you collected certain data, what data you have collected, where did you collect that data from, how you collected the data, and how you analyze the data. So meaning that the methodology section is going to tell us this key information. Number one is why certain data is collected. Number two is what type of data have you collected. Is it secondary data or primary data that you have collected, and where did you collect it from? That means the area that which you have collected your data from, or it entails about the study population, and then how you collected that particular area, that particular study. How did you collect that data that which you have entailed in your study? Whether you have collected using interview, whether it is questionnaire administration, whether it is observation, whether it is focus group discussion, how did you collect your data, and also how you analyze your data. That means the tools that which you use for data analysis. So a research method, we should try to differentiate between method and methodology. A research method refers only to the various specific tools or ways that data can be collected and analyzed. So when we talk about a research method, we talk about the tools that which you use for data collection and analysis. For example, the questionnaire, the interview checklist, the data analysis software such as SPSS and much more, and many other tools which you use for data collection. The first phase of any methodology, it involves data collection. Now, because sometimes we need to collect data from a large population and therefore it takes a lot of time and costly. Now, because it is costly and time consuming to collect data from an entire population, this calls for a selection of a few to represent the entire population. And this process is what we call sampling. Now, in order for us to undertake our methodology, the first thing we are going to do is to collect the data from our respondents or our study population. Sometimes the population is too large or too huge for us to collect data from. And once it is a large population, you find that it will take a lot of time, and sometimes even it costs a lot, because covering the interviews or the questionnaire administration in a huge population, it is not that much cheap. So that is why in research, we have this process that which we call sampling. What then is sampling? Let us try to look into the concept of sampling. In order for us to explain sampling, let us take a very simple example in order to explain this concept. Suppose you want to estimate, for example, the average age of the students in a class. There are two methods that which you can be able to actually get the average age of the students in the class. The first method is to contact all students in the class, find out their ages, add them up, then divide this number by the number of students. So this is the definition of what we call average. Getting the total number of the students, then get the age of each student, then divide the total age by the total number of the students. That is the definition of what we call average. The second method that you're going to get the ages of the students is to select a few students from the class, ask them their ages, add them up, then divide by the number of students you have asked, which enables you to make an estimate of the average age of the class. Meaning that by using the second method, the researcher has used a concept called sampling to pick out a few students, conduct his age research, and then generalize his results to the entire population, which in this case is all the students in the class. So the second method, which actually we are trying to refer to here, is the concept of sampling, where instead of asking every student in the class about his age, you're only going to select a few students, depending on what method you use to select them, but you will select a few students from the class, then the few that whom you have selected, ask them about their age, add their ages up, divide their ages with them, and then you can make an estimate average age of that particular class. So what then is sampling? Sampling, according to Kumar 2005 in his book, page 148, he defines sampling as the process of selecting a few sample or a few from a bigger group. That bigger group he calls the sampling population, to become the basis of estimating or predicting a fact, a situation, or outcome regarding the bigger group. This is according to Kumar 2005. Meaning that according to Kumar, he says that you are going to select a few. That few he calls it a sample from a bigger group. That bigger group he calls the sampling population, or in this case, the study population. So using the results of that you get from the sample, you can make an estimate or predict a fact about the entire bigger group. So sampling involves the selection of a number of study units from a defined study population. Now the population is too large for us to consider collecting information from all its members, and that is why we apply the concept of sampling. Instead, we select a sample of individuals, hoping that the sample is going to be a representative of the population that which we are investigating. So this diagram illustrates to us about the concept of sampling. Yes, we have the sampling population, or the population you are trying to investigate or study. From the sampling population, you'll be able to determine your sample. You can see the sample is a small population or a small size that which is got from the larger size. And then now from your sample, you'll be able to find out the sample statistics, and then the results you'll be able to get from that, you'll be able to estimate it to the population parameters. Now, why do we do sampling? We do sampling for a number of reasons. Number one, we do sampling because we want to reduce cost. Remember, we said that it is very expensive to collect data from the entire population. Now, because it is expensive, that's why we have to reduce this expense by reducing the size of the population. Number two is because of speed. Where urgency is necessary, data can be collected and analyzed within a short time. Of course, sometimes we say census is time consuming. Census is a type of method that which data collection method which involves collecting data from the entire population without using any sampling statistics, but rather you're only going to collect from the whole population, whether it is 1,000, whether it is 10,000, whether it is 100,000, whether it is 1 million, you have to collect data from all. That is census. But when it comes to sampling, the speed which is used to actually collecting the data, it is very, very simple in sampling rather than in a census kind of a method. So speed is another reason why we do sampling. Practicability is also another reason why we do sampling. Of course, it is tiresome and even impractical to collect data from the entire population, so it enables the researcher to complete the exercise. Okay? Apart from practicability, another reason is about resistance. So not all the subjects will be traced or will accept to participate in the study. So sample study results are even more accurate than census studies. Because sometimes even when you decide you're going to use census meaning that you're going to collect data from every individual. So sometimes you find some individuals or some participants might actually resist from taking part in the study. and therefore it means that it will affect your final results. But rather, when we use sampling, actually, we find that actually the results we get from sampling, it is actually even more accurate than the census studies. So also another reason why we use sampling is where a test is destructive in nature, sampling can be used. Sometimes when you're doing, for example, an experiment in a population, you cannot just go and experiment it to all the population. Maybe the test is destructive in nature. Maybe you are going to kill everyone in the population, and that is not good. So that's why we sometimes apply the concept of actually sampling. Now, apart from the reasons why we do sampling, there are some key terminologies which we would like you to understand in this lecture. Number one is the population or the study population. Remember, as we have looked from the previous definition, sampling, it involves selecting a few from a larger population. So the population here is that population about which an investigator wishes to draw a conclusion. For example, Golis University lecturers, borough residents, pregnant women, patients at Borough General Hospital, Northern Village residents, or IDPs. That particular population whom you want to investigate is what we call your study population. Maybe you're doing your research and your research is about impact of motivation on the lecturers at Golis University. Then it means that the lecturers at Golis University will be your study population. Or you are doing your research among the borough residents, among pregnant women, that which is mentioned in your title. Those target groups which are mentioned in your title will become your population. Another terminology is the sampling frame. A sampling frame here we say is a list that should include all those in the population to be sampled and exclude all those who are not in the population. This is also known as the target population. So the target population means that now from the larger population there is a target which actually you are going to investigate, meaning that the target population, the number of the target population will be slightly smaller than that of the study population. Then another terminology is sample. Of course, as we have said, sample, this is the smaller group of people who you select to be in your study, or sometimes you can say the respondents. And then we have the sample size. The sample size, this is the number of people or elements drawn from the population from whom you obtain the required information. Sometimes from the sample that whom you have selected, maybe you might end up not collecting information from all of them. Or maybe some of them might end up skipping participating in your study. So those that whom you collect your information from will become your sample size. Take an example. Maybe my population is Golis University lecturers. Maybe let's say there are 100 lecturers, and then out of 100 lecturers, then come to my target population. Then maybe I target only the lecturers in the faculty of medicine and health sciences. Then let's say maybe the lecturers in that faculty, there are approximately, let's say, 50 lecturers. Then from the target or the sampling frame, I develop my sample from 50. How many lecturers will be my sample size using my several sample determination processes? Maybe I come and I say 45 or 42 will be my sample. So 42 are the ones whom I need to collect data from. Then if I'm going to collect from 42, when I try to distribute my tools, such as the questionnaire, maybe I will only get feedback from, let's say, 40 or 39. So that means that 39 or 49 or 40 will become my sample size, because they are the ones at whom I have obtained the required information. Other terminologies, they include, for example, sampling design or strategy. The sampling procedure that which you use to produce any type of a sample. For example, stratified sampling, simple random sampling, and many others, as we are going to see. Apart from this, they elaborate to us from the population or from the target population, how are you going to actually determine your sample, or how are you going to select your sample. Maybe you have already determined your sample is going to be 42 from the 50. How are you going to get the 42 from the 50? Which method are you going to use? That is what we call sampling design or strategy. Then we have a sampling unit. A sampling unit, this is the unit of selection in the sampling process. For example, in a sample of districts, the sampling unit is a district. In a sample of persons, the sample unit is a person. In a sample of students, the sample unit is each student. Okay? In a sample of lecturers, for example, the sample unit is each lecturer. Okay, so sampling unit is each unit of selection in your sampling process. And then we have sample statistics. According to this, this is your findings on the basis of the information obtained from the respondents or the sample. So the sample statistics will become the basis of estimating the prevalence of a characteristics in the study population. In other words, what do you find out from your sample? That will entail your sample statistics. This table here, or this diagram, it illustrates to us the sampling process as we have explained earlier. First, you have you define your population. After you define a population, next you'll be able to develop a sampling frame. After you develop your sampling frame of the target population, you determine your sample size. Then after you determine your sample size, you specify your sample method. How are you going to get this sample size of yours? And then go ahead and select your sample. This illustrates to us the sampling process. Yes, like we've said, that you select your sample. And how do you select your sample? So we say that actually sampling methods that which we would like to clarify here, they include a number of processes or a number of procedures which it's important for us to elaborate. Sampling techniques are divided into two main groups or two main categories, and they include probability random sampling as well as non-probability sampling. We'll talk about probability sampling or random sampling. In this particular method here, sampling frame is available. You have a sampling frame of the target population whom you're going to choose from. Every element in the target population of the sampling frame has equal chance of being chosen in the sample for the survey being conducted. It is scientific and operationally convenient and simple in theory, and results of this method may be generalized. Why? Because every unit has equal chance. Every unit has equal chance of being selected for the study. This is different from non-probability. In a non-probability sampling method, every element in the universe or in the sampling frame does not have equal probability of being chosen. And it is operationally convenient and it is simple in theory, and also the results in this study may not be generalized. Okay, so let us talk about the probability sampling method. Under this probability random sampling method, there are four commonly used types of probability random sampling method. These include simple random sampling, systematic sampling, as well as stratified cluster sampling methods. So those are the four major methods of which are used when we are actually trying to apply the probability sampling method. So the first one is the simple random sampling, as we are going to see. But before we go into that, and try to understand some of this definition in our upcoming explanations, whenever we see capital N, it illustrates the number of elements in the sampling frame or the population at whom you are targeting. Then we have this small n, this is the number of elements in the sample or the sample size. And then we have f, small f, which is equal to small n over capital N. That gives us the sampling frame. That is the sample size divided by the target frame or the target population of the sampling frame. Let us talk about those random sampling methods. So number one is simple random sampling. And this is the most basic scheme of random sampling. In order to select a simple random sample, you need to follow the following step. Number one, make a number list of all the units in the population from which you want to draw a sample. Each unit on the population should be numbered in a sequence from 1 to the last one. Capital N here, it means the size of the population. If there are 100 people, you have to number from 1 up to 100. If there are 20 participants, you have to number from 1 up to 20. Okay, the capital N is the last number that whom you have targeted. Then after you have numbered your list, the next step is decide on the sample that which you want to select, maybe the size of the sample. Okay, after you decide on the size of the sample, select the required number of sample units, either using a fishbowl draw or a computer program. Simple. Those numbers you have already written, maybe on a piece of paper, try to mix them on a fishbowl draw, and you make it something like what we call baht nasib, so that then you select the number that you want from that particular fishbowl draw. This method actually is good, and also it has its own shortfalls or its own disadvantages. The advantages is that the method is unbiased, yes, because everybody has equal chance of being selected, and also it is straightforward and easy to understand. But the disadvantage is that it is time consuming, and it can be very difficult to get a list of each and every person who are eligible to take part in the study. Now, because of getting that list, maybe it might be difficult. That's why it makes this method somehow challenging. Number two, we have is systematic sampling. And under the systematic sampling, we say it is very similar to the simple random sampling, only with one exception. In a systematic sampling, only one number, we call it the skip interval, is needed throughout the entire sampling process. And to use systematic sampling, a researcher needs to, number one, number the elements in the population from one to the last one or to the final number, according to just as what we have done with the simple random sampling. Then step number two, decide on the sample size, that is the small n that you want to or you need to use in your study. Then develop your skip interval. A skip interval is also needed. We abbreviate it as K, and to calculate the skip interval is equal to the total population divided by the sample size, where K is the interval and N is the entire population and small n is the sample size. So randomly, you're going to select a number that is between the interval. Tell us where to start selecting individuals from the list. Names are selected using the skip. New names are selected using the skip interval. Names are selected using the skip interval. Okay, so we continue with the systematic sampling, and like we say, systematic sampling, it is just the same as simple random sampling, but only that in a systematic sampling you need to have that skip interval, and you use the skip interval to select your sample. Now, as we had mentioned that earlier, that names will be selected using the skip interval. And in an example that we have here, for example, in this study, I have a total population of 100. That is my target. My target is 100. And from the 100, I want to get, let's say, 20. 20 is my sample size. So how do I get the skip interval? Like we said, it is capital N divided by small n. That's the target divided by the sample. So when you divide 100 by 20, you get a 5, meaning that I'm going to select a random number from 1 to 5. For example, I select any number between 1 to 5, where I will begin from. For example, I select 4, or you can select 2, or you can select 3, or whatever. So I select 4 as an example. So I'll begin from 4. That's what it says. Start with number 4 and take every fifth unit. For example, when I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number 9 I will take. Again I count 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number 14 I will take. Again I count 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number 19 I will take. Again I count 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number 24 I will take. So I will be able to use the skip interval 5 or number 5 as my skip interval. Then I will take the unit that falls in the fifth unit or in the fifth place. So if you try to look into the ones we have highlighted here in blue color, those will be my study or my sample study participants. Those will be taking part in my study. And the total number is around 20, is exactly 20 as the number of which I want in my sample size. So all in all, in a systematic sampling, you need that skip interval, and you use that skip interval to actually select your sample. So this process or this method of systematic sampling is good, yes. Items are chosen from the population by the researcher at a numbered interval. For example, every 10th house along a street, or every 10th student, or every 5th student, or every 5th lecturer, or whatever it is. It has advantages and disadvantages. Among the advantages is that it is easy to carry out and it is more precise than simple random sampling. However, it has also its own disadvantages, which I wanted you to discuss as a class, as a student. What do you think are some of the disadvantages of systematic sampling? Of course, somebody will say it is time consuming. Yes, because numbering those units from one until the last one, it is not a simple thing. It's not easy. Also, maybe you might end up falling on a unit that which is not ready to take part in the study, and therefore it will affect your population or your target, your sample size, and so on and so forth. It has its own disadvantages, which actually a researcher might face. The third method is the stratified sampling method. Simple random sampling and systematic sampling, they are good if specific characteristics of the population are of no concern. If you don't care about certain characteristics such as age, gender, or whatever. If the individuals in the population are not equal in features, then stratified sampling should be used to ensure that the profile of the sample matches the profile of the population. Stratified sampling is used when factors that distinguish population members from one another are related to the subject you are studying. Such factors may include, for example, gender, race, religion, language, and many others. Stratified sampling ensures that the strata or the layers in the population are fairly represented in the sample, and therefore the sample is also layered exactly like the population. Take an example, gender. Maybe you are more concerned about the gender issues in your study, and therefore you want to divide to select your sample using the gender stratification method. Then it means that you have to actually have equal representation of the gender. If maybe more male are there, then the sample for the more male should be more. For the male should be more. And if the female are less, then the sample of the female should be less. And that's why you say that the sample stratified sampling ensures that the strata in the population are fairly represented in the sample. Stratified sampling involves stratifying your sampling frame. For example, you divide it into males and females if you are using gender as your stratification variable. Secondly, take a random sample from each group, i.e. take a random sample from male and a random sample from females. Put these two sets of people together and now you have your final sample. Note that you can also take a systematic sample from the joint list if that is easier. Now, let's take an example of here. I'm using language as my stratifying variable. Select a proportion, for example, a proportionate stratified sample of 20 members of the Island Video Club, which has 100 members belonging to 3 language-based groups of viewers, for example, English, Mandarin, and others. In this population, out of these 100 people, I need to select 20 from these using the stratified sampling. And of course, I'm using language as my stratifying variable. Now, I will number my population from 00 to 99, gives me a total of 100. And against each number, I put which language the person speaks. For example, this person speaks English, this one speaks English, this one speaks other language, this one speaks English, this one speaks English, English, Mandarin, Mandarin, English, English, Mandarin, English, other language. So after I have identified their languages, the next thing that I will be able to do, I will subdivide the club members into 3 homogeneous subgroups or strata by the language groups. For example, how many people speak English, how many people speak Mandarin, and how many of them speak other languages. When I try to divide them, I will have 3 strata. The first strata is that of English, the second strata is that of Mandarin, and the third one is that of other languages. When I try to look into the ones of English, when I try to count them, maybe I have, let's say, 50. 50 of them speak English, 30 of them speak Mandarin, and 20 of them speak other languages. So, to calculate the overall sampling fraction, F we'll use the following manner. That fraction is equals to, as we mentioned earlier, small n divided by capital N. That is the sample divided by the target population. For example, 20 divided by 100. My target is 20, and my sample is 20, and my target is 100. So when I divide this, I will get 0.2. So I will use this fraction to calculate what sample do I need from the English speakers, what sample do I need from the Mandarin, what sample do I need from the other language speakers, then I will add them up together. Okay, so my fraction that I'm using is 0.2. Now, determine the number of sample elements from the first speakers, or the first sample, to be selected from the English language stratum. In this example, the total population of the people speaking English is 50 times the fraction, which is 0.2 as we had calculated. This will be equals to 10. So from those speaking English, I will select 10. Then by using the simple random sampling method, randomly pick out 10 members from the English stratum. From those that speak English, maybe I will use simple random sampling method. I will be able to select how many? 10 speakers. Then next, determine the number of sample elements from the second sample. That is the second group. So to be selected from the Mandarin language. So in this example, the total number of people speaking Mandarin are 30, okay, times the fraction, which is 0.2, it gives me 6. So by using simple random sampling method, I will randomly pick out 6 members from the Mandarin stratum. In the same manner, the number of sample elements that is from the third population, from the other people speaking other languages, are calculated in the same example. In this example, for example, it will be 20 times the fraction, which is 0.2, it will give me 4. So by using the simple random sampling method, I will randomly pick out 4 members from the other language stratum. And when I add 10 plus 6 plus 4, it will give me 20, which is exactly the number that which I need for my target population. I will combine all the samples collected from the 3 different sets of languages and come up with one general set, which is going to have the stratified members to be used in your study. So simply, that is how you develop your stratum. So this diagram, it demonstrates for us how stratified sampling takes place. You have your list of clients or population. From them, you divide them according to the stratifying method you need. Whether it is languages, whether it is race, whether it is gender, divide them like that. Then from each, you have your population. From each stratum you have a population. Then randomly, you're going to develop your sample using the fraction n, capital small n divided by capital N, okay, as we have explained earlier. So stratified sampling is also another very good and simple method of using selecting a sample. It ensures better coverage of the population than simple random sampling. That is the advantage, because the population based on characteristics will be equally, or will be developed in an equitable manner. For example, if the number of those particular characteristics you're looking for is more and the others is less, meaning representation will be equal. If maybe more of your participants are male, then you select a higher sample from the male side, and if less are female, you select a lesser sample from the female side. It has its own disadvantages, which I would like you to think as a student. What do you think are some of the disadvantages of stratified sampling, which of course includes time consuming, as well as it might be very, very tiresome, dividing the strata, determining the strata of your population, dividing them into different strata. It takes a lot of time, and thereby it sometimes exhausts the research. The fourth method is cluster sampling, and here we say that simple random sampling and stratified sampling techniques are based on researchers' ability to identify each element in a population. It is easy to do this if the total sampling population is small, but if the population is large, for example, in the case of a city, a state, or a country, it becomes difficult and expensive to identify each sampling unit, and therefore it can be very challenging to use the other methods you have mentioned, whether it is simple random sampling or stratified sampling. It's difficult to actually apply to all of them. So in such cases, the use of a cluster sampling becomes more appropriate. Cluster sampling is used when populations can be broken down into many different categories or clusters. For example, villages, districts, cities, etc. Then rather than taking a sample from each cluster, a random selection of a cluster is chosen to represent the whole within each cluster. A random sample is taken. So In a cluster method, it means that you're going to take the whole cluster. For example, a village. Yes. Then from that particular village, you can be able to select your sample from it. For example, maybe you're doing your research in among the villages in a city. Select one of the villages to be your target, and then from that village you have selected, you can also go ahead and develop your sample from that population of that village using either simple random sampling method. Cluster sampling has advantages. Yes, you're taking the whole group at once. It is more economical in terms of time and money, and also it can show regional variations. However, the disadvantage is that it's likely to yield a biased result, especially if only a few clusters are sampled. For example, if there are 10 villages and you decide to go only with one village or two villages, you see it most likely can create biasness because one is not a representation of 10. Difficulty in identifying appropriate salt cluster is also another challenge of using the cluster sampling method. So those are the four methods under the probability sampling method. We have simple random sampling, we have stratified sampling, we have cluster sampling as we have actually mentioned earlier. Now let us try to talk about the non-probability sampling method. Under this one here, we say that in a non-probability sampling, it's a sampling technique in which the researcher selects samples based on subjective judgment of the researcher rather than random selection. That's why we call it non-random or non-probability sampling method. Based on your own, as a researcher, your own understanding, you decide, I am going to use this and this and this to be part of my study. In a non-probability sampling, not all members of the population have a chance of participating in the study. And unlike probability sampling, where each member of the population has a known chance of being selected, in this method, there is no equal chance for the members being selected. Non-probability sampling is a less strict method. This sampling method depends heavily on the expertise of the researchers. Non-probability sampling is carried out by the method of observation and is widely used in a qualitative research as compared to probability, which is widely used in a quantitative research. There are different types of non-probability sampling method. These include convenience sampling, consecutive sampling, quarter sampling, judgmental or purposive sampling, as well as snowball sampling. These are some of those non-probability sampling methods which actually are applicable to a research. Now, I would like you to conduct an individual assignment. Select one of the type of non-probability sampling methods and provide the following information. Definition of the selected sampling method, give examples, as well as explain the advantages and disadvantages of the selected sampling method. These assignments should be submitted not later than 25th of July this month, and through the email address jamadadauda@gmail.com. The total marks for this assignment is 10 marks. Remember, this information you're going to collect from a source, whether it is going to be from a library, from the internet. You have a source you're going to get this information from. Make sure you cite and you give reference to your work. Thank you very much. With those few remarks, brings me to the end of this session where we have tried to explain issues related to sampling as one of the methodologies in our research. See you next time. Wishing you all the best.